Okay, what I want to do today is, and I think we can accomplish quite easily, is wrap up Zhuangzi and the notion of the suspension of judgment. Some reflections there. Go back to Sextus Empiricus as well. So let's return to Zhuangzi. Again, not a skeptic, but doing something methodologically similar. Again, he would be classified as a Taoist, but I'm not sure he would say that himself. Gravity. What I want to do is I want to take a look at a passage in chapter 17 of the Zhuangzi, and I want to dwell there. I'm sorry, chapter 18 of the Zhuangzi. No, it is, I'm sorry, back end of chapter 17. This is on page 247 in the text. Where, like I said, the way that most of the Zhuangzi works, the book, not the person, is it's these almost parable-like stories that we're meant to infer from. Often, unlike Aesop's fables, the moral is not always spelled out for us. So let's see what happens here. This is analogous to, or not really analogous, but similar to the story of the butterfly from last time. 247. Zhuangzi and Huizi were wandering on a bridge over the Hao River. Zhuangzi said, "Look at those mottled fish out wandering at ease. That's what fish like." Huizi said, "You are not a fish. How do you know what fish like?" Well, already Huizi has made a mistake, which was to ask Zhuangzi an obstinate question. You're not a fish. How do you know what fish like? How do you know what they desire? Zhuangzi said, "You are not me. How do you know I don't know what fish like?" Huizi said, "I'm not you, so I certainly don't know what you know. And since you're not a fish, you don't know what fish like." There, perfect. Zhuangzi said, "Let's go back to the beginning when you asked how I knew what fish like. You had to know I knew already in order to ask. I know it by the Hao River. That's how." That ends up being a little bit of a pun in the English. What's the deal here? So let's break this down and unpack this. And as the note says there, the word how there also implies a kind of a concept of where. So basically, we got two characters. We got Zhuangzi here, the character Zhuangzi, and also Huizi. Walking over the river, Zhuangzi sees these fish living their best life now. Obviously, they found happiness and contentment. Look, these fish are enjoying themselves. To which Huizi says, "How do you know? You're not a fish. How could you possibly know what fish like?" To which Zhuangzi replies again, "You're not me. How do you know that I don't know?" What's going on here? Let's investigate.
You don't know what others know, so you can't judge what they do or they don't know.
Precisely. You don't know. Now, maybe. I've never been a fish. Obviously, Zhuangzi has been a butterfly, so he's an expert there. Okay. Or not. But here, yeah, when it's obviously the case, I know we say often, if we look at it from this perspective, full stop, can you ever actually look at it from another perspective? Look at something from another perspective, in a literal sense. No, you are constrained by your eyeballs. There you are. Unless anyone in here astrally projected before? I think not. And if you have, please forget the suspension paper, make that your paper. Tell me all about it. But no, we really can't take ourselves out of our limited perspective. That's part of what the existentialists find so frustrating, is our finitude, our limitedness, okay? Whether it be Husserl, Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Simone de Beauvoir. Here we are, we're like stuck on these axes on the planet, okay, both in terms of physical space, the X, Y, Z axes in which we find ourselves, other axes of other dimensions, which I won't enumerate, constrained by time. We're stuck in this moment, and we can't really get out of it. We can't really see beyond it, left to our own devices. But then to say, so again, there's two things going on here on two levels, which Zhuangzi likes to do quite a bit. One, we might ask the question, well, I mean, how does Zhuangzi know that the fish are happy? Look at the fish. There are some things of which we can be of little doubt. And this goes to the different kinds of skepticism as well. Is anybody really doubting right now that you woke up this morning? Now, we could be radical skeptics and say, no, I don't know. There's no way to know. Perhaps the universe was created 5 minutes ago and we've all just been implanted with memories. Sure, maybe. Maybe that's true. But there's no reason to assume that or presume that. So it's rational for us to say, oh, okay, maybe that's a possibility. There's no reason to assume that. Okay, we need not go on. Well, but maybe it's possible. Yeah, but just because something's possible doesn't mean you need to put your chips down on it, so to speak, just because of the possibility. Okay, so possibility does not imply necessity. Unless you're dealing with possible necessity and modal logic. That's a different thing. Okay. So here, when Zhuangzi makes his statement about the fish, that's what fish like. They're happy. That's something that we can outwardly infer just based on observation. Okay, is it definitive? Is it science? No. But then when Hutzi says, how do you know? That's a different question. Because now we're not talking about something that we can observe out in the world. Now we're talking about getting into the mind of another person. Which also begs the question, here's where radical skepticism can come up. It comes up in René Descartes to some degree. It comes up in Augustine. It comes up in Ibn Sina, or Avicenna. I prefer Ibn Sina. Okay? What's that? What is so the one skeptical position that one can have is a radical kind of position is that of solipsism. I'll put that up here. I think to some degree, Zhuangzi is having us avoid this as well. What is solipsism? Well, this is an error that Descartes attempts to avoid. Now, this is something, people put this on coffee mugs for some reason. It's probably the most famous quotation out of philosophy. Descartes' statement in Discourse on the Method, je pense donc je suis, which, as he originally wrote it, but in Latin, cogito ergo sum. What's that?
I think, therefore I am.
Yep. Cogito ergo, I'll put the cogito ergo sum. René Descartes. This thing. I think literally cogito, je pense, ergo. Therefore, we use this for our ergo as well. Donc je suis, I am. Descartes had the privilege of writing both in French and Latin, inspired by, indirectly by John Calvin in that regard. Who's heard this before? You've at least heard the saying, okay? Herein lies the problem. Well, what does it mean? I think, therefore I am.
It means you know you exist because you think, because you know that you're conscious, therefore you refer you exist.
Yeah, there seems to be an inference going on that my existence is predicated upon what? And you just said it. My existence, I exist because, let's say it backwards. I exist because what? Thinking. Now here, the problem is, for Descartes, thinking for him is not an activity. Thought is a substance for Descartes. It's a thing. Okay? Not a physical thing, that's what thought is for him. It's non-physical stuff for Descartes. So really, he put it in Cartesianism, trying to get it right. I am thinking stuff, therefore I am. Because if I were not, then I wouldn't be thinking stuff. Therefore, immaterial is actually more consequential than the material. I'm more my mind than I am my body. That's what Descartes' getting at there. But Descartes tries to avoid this both in his discourse on the method and in his meditations, especially in his meditations. Wants to avoid the error of going, and the mistake you can make with this is this: I think, therefore I am. Notice this is not in the first person plural. We think, therefore we are. What's Descartes' conclusion? That there are minds? That there are thinking stuffs, thinking substances? No. His conclusion, at least here, and this is Discourse on the Method, part 4, where he actually says this. All I really know is that I am. I don't know if others are. So solipsism is the view that only the subject exists. Well, which subject? Whichever subject is doing the thinking at the moment. So solipsism is the view, like for me, if I'm a solipsist, I believe that really only I exist. Everything else, like, you're there, but you're not really a mind. You're kind of golems of sorts. You're there, but I'm the only mind. Now why? Now I can know, because from this perspective, I can know that I exist. I can hear my own thoughts. I can have my own psychological experience. Hear the voice or voices in my head. As Fichte says, we can kind of reflect on our own thought processes as a subject. We can think about ourselves as subjects. Fichte says in the introduction to the Wissenschaftslehre, which is a fun German word for philosophy, just kind of look inward and you can think about your own thinking. Maybe other animals can think. Maybe that rat can get to the cheese at the end of the maze, but the rat is probably not thinking about its thinking about getting to the cheese at the end of the maze, but that's something we can do. But the mistake you might make, say many, is that you might end up concluding that only you exist. Now there's a couple of levels of this. There's a kind of a stalwart metaphysical belief in solipsism, I think that few believe. But there have been people throughout history, like, I exist, everything else is kind of an illusion. Now, there's maybe a reason for that. Can we get into the minds of other people? And here comes the disconnect. Like, you have your own, all those thought processes I just described, you have your own feelings, desires, thoughts, wants, pains, pleasures. Can you, though, and I know we use this expression all the time, this is when we talk about empathy, can you, though, ever actually experience directly any of that in someone else? Directly. Indirectly, sure. That's what empathy and sympathy are about, right? I think that takes a kind of an emotional maturity, yes? Like, to be able to identify, this other person is in pain. This other person looks like they're thinking. This other person is suffering. This other person is... in order to be able to do that, it takes a certain kind of maturity. So really young children are not good at that, right? Really, really young children. I mean, children can be adorable, yes? Sure. But they can also be tyrannical if left to their own devices. They have to be constantly remediated, okay? But we can't really directly experience someone else's mind. We can't know someone else, even if we could read thoughts, so to speak. We can't really get into someone else's thoughts. We can use language to express our views and other kinds of communication. It might be nonverbal. We do this a lot. In fact, one of the things I find most frustrating about masks, all right, this phenomenon, is that it's much more difficult to read people. Yes? All right, so I mean, I can't tell if anybody's yawning, smiling. I mean, it's a little bit in the eyes, but I feel, sometimes to get an expression, I feel like a vaudeville actor up here. Ha! All right? Trying to express myself, which makes dialogue and dialectic a lot more tedious. All right? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, let's take off the masks and just, dramatize what's going on or something like that. That's not my point. But it makes the communication more difficult. But even when we are communicating as effectively as possible, we can't really fully express ourselves. And it's not because language is entirely inadequate, but all communication is media of some kind. Now consider that word, media. Literally, what does it mean? It's the Latin word for middle. We talk about the media, okay? All communication is media. This is media right now. Like I said, media means the middle between what? Between my thinking and your thinking. Between my speaking and your listening. That's the nature of we talk about media when we're, it usually has to do with the news for some reason. People, they're on the ground wherever they are, and they're through the airwaves or whatever it is, communicating to you. That's what media is. It goes through the middle from the source of origin to your ear holes and eye holes. Okay? The windows to your soul. But that's all communication, and not just verbal communication. Okay? All communication is going from point A to point B. Okay? But since it's happening in a medium, there's not a direct conduit there. I don't have thoughts, and then bam, you have thoughts too that are identical, right? Hopefully, I want them to be a correspondence. Okay. I don't want there to be an archetype-ectype distinction. Or, oh no, we really blew it in the echo. Okay. Do we not desire, for when we communicate, for what we say, for then people to understand what we're saying? Is that not the goal? Unless we're trying to get out of being in trouble or something? Right? To obscure, I think of, I love it when children do something like this. 1 plus 1, what does it equal? And little kids will go something like this. Well, is that a 2 or a 3? Whichever one it needs to be. Okay, so sometimes we obscure when we don't know. We want to, it's whatever it needs to be in the moment. But we don't have the ability to have, sometimes we talk about direct communication, but there's really no such thing as, in a technical sense, of direct communication. All communication is, I have something here, I'm trying to express it, and hopefully the echo of that happens in your own mind corresponds to the archetype of what I'm saying. But has anyone ever been misunderstood before? Uh-huh. Well, what I meant by that was, and that right there, and it's right here with Zhuangzi again. But the mistake that we can make is thinking that there's only a me. Now, I said it in a metaphysical sense. We can be solipsists by saying only I exist. Frankly, I find that a ridiculous position. Okay, it kind of makes sense, okay, because I can only know my own mind. But we can kind of dismiss that. I don't think I even need to disprove it. There are people that do it. Descartes does this to some degree. At least there's a God too, maybe. Descartes would say. And other people have addressed the solipsism. But there's an existential kind of solipsism that happens as well, where maybe we don't literally say, only I exist, but sometimes we act as though that is the case. I think sometimes this happens because of that lack of empathy that I was talking about. People are solipsistic. They're not saying I only exist, but they act as though that's kind of true. Well, other people are just, there's an alterity there, they're just otherly. They don't really matter. Because there's me. So there's a kind of egoism involved there, or egotism. So don't fall into that trap of being egotistical. My distinction there between egoism and egotism is this. I think colloquially that we can say they're equivalent. Egoism I take as a theory of ethics that says you ought always act in your own rational self-interest, which is not the same thing as selfishness. Okay, rational self-interest is not hedonism. But egotism, on the other hand, is I only care about one thing, me. There's nothing rational about it. That's my distinction here. But with this, what was Zhuangzi's error? How do you know? Zhuangzi, my dear friend, how do you know what's going on in Zhuangzi's head? And the presumptive problem here was that we can't really fully, we use the expressions like, well, look at it from their perspective, or sometimes, at least in English, we use this one. Put yourself in their shoes. Common expression, yes? Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Curious that it's shoes and not some other article of clothing. I don't know why we settled on shoes. But there it is. Put yourself in someone, and in other languages sometimes there's different articles of clothing involved. Can you literally put yourself in someone else's shoes? Yes. Okay? They might not fit, but you can. But what does the expression mean, to put yourself? Is it try and see something from someone else's perspective? But it takes an attempt to transpose oneself outside of one's own experience. This comes back to that note. I've come back to it again about, I think it's the third or fourth time I've said it today, the notion of empathy. Getting into someone else's mind. Huizi's problem was he didn't even think about, well, does Zhuangzi know this or not? He presumed, how do you know? In a kind of mode of frustration. Did he ask Zhuangzi, hey, what do you know about fish? From a position of deference? Not that we have to defer all the time. But he just automatically assumed that Zhuangzi didn't know what he was talking about. Because of a lack of perspective. So this is, how many times have I seen on like social media where someone says, it's usually some idiot trying to mansplain to somebody, okay? Where stuff like this will happen. Where someone will make a statement on Twitter saying something definitive about science. And then somebody will come up and say something like, you really should read the scientist on this, and because they would tell you that you're wrong. And then the person will respond, I am a scientist. Or something like that. Like I wrote the book on that. I can't tell you how many of my colleagues, one of the worst things about academia, we have to write papers all the time too, all right? Or else we perish. But when we have to get double-blind reviews when this happens, anyone ever had anything blindly reviewed before? Like in a paper? I know sometimes we'll do it in high school. Turn your paper into the person next to you and they grade it or something. It's kind of like that, but worse. But what will happen all the time is if you're an expert on a subject, people will say, you're really mistaken here. You should quote this person. But since it's a blind review, they don't know who they're reviewing. And so what will often happen is people are told, you should read this person on this subject. That's the person being reviewed. So like, it's never happened to me, but what it would be like is someone tells me, I'm writing an article and someone says, hey, you should read more Burris on this. You obviously don't know what you're talking about. This happens all the time. It's never happened to me, but it happens all the time. And so what do you do at that point? Because again, it's double-blind review. You can't say, no, I am the person. Well, the blind review has failed. Now we have a bias. You're not going to get published anyway. Just might as well quit while you're at it. All right, so that'll happen sometimes. But the point here being, we can't really presume to know what someone else is thinking. Now here from a position of suspension, the problem Huizi had was it's not that we shouldn't bring into question what does Zhuangzi really know about fish. That's not the point. Okay, the point here is, again, the inferences that you have to make here are a bit more subtle. They're a little more obvious in the Chinese too. But the subtle point is Huizi's challenging of Zhuangzi. When someone has expertise, how do you know what you're talking about? Especially when someone, I mean, instances we have had lately, someone's qualified in something, yeah, well, they don't know what they're talking about. How do the scientists know this? Science, whether it be biology or epidemiology, whatever it is, all right, often, it's not that experts are perfect by any means, or that knowledge is absolute in some capital A kind of way. But how can we prejudge or be prejudicial about someone else's knowledge on something? Do we know the epistemic capacities of everyone around us? Do we know what everyone else knows? Again, remember, go back to Socrates, all right? I know one thing, and that's that I know nothing. Socrates made no presumptions about other people that they didn't make themselves, right? Much to the chagrin of everyone in Athens, okay? Namely Antaeus, Lycon, and Miletus, all right, who brought him up on charges. And what happened to every one of those three and others in Athens? Socrates would go around to everybody saying, hey, apparently you're the expert on this. Tell me more about this. Well, yeah, I am the expert. I think the best example of this is in the Euthyphro. Now, this is supposedly after he's been brought on trial already. But in Euthyphro, Socrates is, talking to Euthyphro, and Euthyphro says, oh, by the way, I'm an expert on ethics. In fact, Euthyphro says it more boldly than that. He says, and I quote, I, Euthyphro, would not be superior to the majority of men if I did not have adequate knowledge of all such things. That's bold. Okay, you're the expert. But as you go, Socrates says, all right, great. Tell me, ti estin to hosion. All right, what is piety? What is it? And several times Euthyphro tries to give an answer and ends up being, each answer ends up being more and more inadequate. We're like, yeah, that's good. We're getting there, but we're not getting to something precise. Like, basically, analogously, Socrates will do things like this. Like, Euthyphro, what is color? And it's almost like Euthyphro goes, blue. No, red. Yellow. Okay, yeah, okay, great. Those are all colors. That's not my question. What is color? But that's what he keeps doing. Okay, he's asking for a definition. He keeps giving examples rather than a definition. A list of examples is not a definition. And then in the end, Socrates says, all right, you've 5 attempts. They're unsatisfactory. Let's start back at the beginning. To which Euthyphro responds, it's getting late, Socrates, and it's time for me to go. Bye? And just leaves. And of course, Socrates keeps talking to himself. Oh, alas, will we ever come to the truth and stuff like that? Why did I recount that story? There, the problem was Euthyphro overestimated his own knowledge. For sure. But Socrates, not that he's learned anything from Zhuangzi directly, but Socrates also didn't presume the ignorance of Euthyphro. Euthyphro said, hey, you're smart? All right, let me defer. Show me your smartness. Give me your knowledge and wisdom, please. Zhuangzi is telling us here, not the Zhuangzi in the story, but the author of the text, something similar. Don't presume the ignorance of others. Do we do this? Now, I mean, I mean here not necessarily moral ignorance. We can think of other people are just evil. That's something different. I mean here, in terms of epistemic ignorance. Okay, Greek notion of ignorance. A Chinese one too, I think, but not a Semitic one. By that I mean, in Islam, Judaism, Christianity, you see this word come up, at least in translation, a lot. I want to make sure this is not what we're talking about. Is in I pity them. That's you two going for Mr. T. What's a fool? Now, I was going to say, I know I just talked about ignorance and, don't speak up when you don't know what you're talking about. It's different here, all right? Locution's good. Lipford, go ahead.
is like devoid of sense and to some extent of moral knowledge, like, or, I don't know.
I think that's fair. All right, I think that's a good, ad hoc take. I think that's fine. But what I want to point out, like fool, and we have equivalents in English, right? Most of which make no sense. I don't know why we use these, like idiot. Okay. What is an idiot? Like stupid. All the insults that little kids say to each other. Well, not all of them, but several of them. Dumb. Like, what does the word dumb actually mean?
You don't have a lot of knowledge?
Well, that's how we use it, right? Like when someone's, oh, you're dumb, right? That's probably the classic ad hominem attack, right? You're dumb. Literally means you cannot speak. That's what we're actually, so like when you're dumbfounded, nothing's coming out. Okay, so that's what the word dumb or idiot means. So consumed with like an inner, like you can't. It also kind of means the same thing. You can't really speak because you're so consumed with what's going on inside your own mind. But fool, we don't use this one. Maybe we should bring it back as an insult. We need to say it more often. All right, hear some people say it, but fool. The reason why I bring this one up is there's a couple of different meanings of fool, and we kind of mean them interchangeably. And I want to talk about the notion of fool, like in Greek and Chinese thought, because I think they're analogous to each other. But what we have also in our society is a Semitic notion of fool as well. By Semitic, I mean coming from Semitic-speaking peoples, Arabic and Hebrew. So this comes out of both the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, and the Quran, Hadith for that matter too, a couple, and Sharia. So I'll call it Abrahamic. Okay, the Abrahamic notion of a fool. All right, someone like the Psalms. It says this twice. The fool has said in his heart. Mind you, yes, your aortic pump does not have vocal cords. Just calm down. Okay, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Stop. Who's the fool here? Why is this person a fool in this context? Because he said that there is no God. Now, it's not because he's ignorant. It's not because he lacks knowledge. So this is the Abrahamic notion of a fool. It's not because he lacks knowledge. It's because he lacks it's because they lack moral wisdom. Okay, the fool in an Abrahamic sense is in the wrong. Okay, wrong in the sense of you did wrong, not wrong in the sense of you did your math incorrectly. 2 + 2 = 5. Well, it depends on how we're counting. Truly. But so that's an Abraham, and sometimes we'll use fool in that sense. And so there's a kind of equivocation going on where we've got the same word, but it's taking on different meanings at the same time. So not that. We're not talking about that kind of fool. What kind of fool are we talking about? More Greek notion, a fool is someone who is ignorant in the sense that they do not know. Not that they do wrong. That's the Abrahamic notion of a fool, someone who does wrong. And usually from a willful, like someone who is a fool in the Abrahamic sense is usually considered hard-hearted. They've decided they've consigned themselves. You know what? I'm mad. Okay, probably because of something Hashem did. I'm mad for some reason. That's why that person's a fool. And they don't follow the mitzvah, the law. They don't want anything to do with it. Okay, not that sense of fool. To the Greeks and to the Chinese, the fool is someone, for the Greeks specifically, the fool is someone that does not know because they don't use reason. For the Chinese, someone's a fool, especially like for Zhuangzi, if they're not living in accordance with tradition. For the Taoists, like Zhuangzi would follow this position. Someone who does not live in accordance with nature would be a fool. That would be the Taoist position there. Like flow like the river. No, I'm gonna flow uphill. Fool. Rivers don't flow uphill. So don't do that. But the fool here, point to the fool. The problem here, I'm not you, so I certainly don't know what you know. And since you're not a fish, you don't know what fish are like. Perfect. That's Huizi talking. To which, again, Zhuangzi says, let's go back to the beginning. When I asked you how I knew what fish were like, you had to know I already knew in order to ask. You made a presumption, Huizi. You were saying I'm ignorant, all right, because we're ignorant about all such things. But you could have only done so by presuming your own, not ignorance, I guess we could just say ignorance, okay? The knowledge there. You presumed the knowledge. It's kind of like when sometimes people will say, you know, it's kind of hard to argue against logic without using logic. Right? I've heard some positions. Now, I think there are ways in which logic has applications and doesn't have applications, like in quantum mechanics or something like that. But it's difficult to try, or it's also say, talk about the inefficacy of language without using language. People make these kinds of arguments. The problem that Zhuangzi had with Huizi there is he tried to say something declarative by saying we can't really make such declarations. We can't really say anything, and I'm going to prove that to you by saying something. What's the moral here? We'll go back to Esau. Be careful, and this goes back to what he was saying about the giant turtles last time. Okay, if I could sum up Zhuangzi here in a couple of pithy axioms. Epigrams, we'll go with that. 1, you don't know it all. Now that should be obvious. How could we know it all? But how many of us in our own minds consider ourselves to be experts on all things that are? I mean, how many of us have called people, perhaps rightly, maybe in the last week, a fool? Or thought it. All right, so it's because it's been a spicy week. Okay, but we often think of ourselves, we kind of overestimate our own expertise. Yes. Other people are idiots, not me. When I even if I'm just thinking and I don't open my mouth on a subject, I know what I'm talking about. Now we might even be able to declare our own areas of ignorance. Oh, I'm not an expert in that. It's not something I've ever really studied. I don't know jujitsu. Okay, I don't know Portuguese. Okay, I don't. Or we say things like that. We have these domains where we say, yeah, I don't know that, but I'll tell you what I do know. And the things that I'm going to go ahead and affirm that I do know, I am right. And I will let you know that I'm right. Which Zhuangzi would say, settle down. You are so limited at where you are. You should be more reflective on your own finitude. There is a limitedness to you. You can't really stress enough how limited each of us are. It doesn't mean that in a denigrating way. But we're really, again, it's like we're carrying lanterns in the dark. You know, Plato has his Republic Book 7, his allegory of the cave, where people are down in the cave, looking at shadows on the wall, thinking those are the things that are. Look, a tree! But it's really people in the background, putting up like little shadow puppets of trees. And this person escapes from their fetters, goes outside, and behold the sun! The one, the form of the good itself. All right, brightness shining down on everything. That's Plato's take. As we ascend in knowledge, we go to the source of truth and the light, its light. Whereas for Zhuangzi, really all we ever get is holding our flashlight in the dark, or lantern, if you will. Okay? We have this little illumination, but it doesn't entirely expose. It doesn't bring everything to light. We might have this little bit of light here contained in this small space, but it's limited, as is our attention span, and it's not constant. So I have my little lantern here now. Am I going to hold this here for the rest of my life? Probably not. Think about this. How many times have you can't remember something, you start doing this thing where you kind of like half snap? Oh, I know, that person was in that movie. What was it? I lost the plot. Has anyone ever had that before? Like you know something and you've forgotten it. It shows you how fragile knowledge is. Even knowledge of something simple like an object, or where you left your keys. or your phone. Where is it? Right. That kind of phenomenon. So we're limited there. Also, we're also limited in assessing, we're very bad at assessing the knowledge of others. In a couple of different ways. So for Zhuangzi here, it's that we assume, like if we're overestimating our own intelligence, we grossly underestimate, the corollary of that is we grossly underestimate the knowledge of everyone else. Everyone else is an idiot. Especially if I don't know them personally. So sometimes we'll make little statements about people that we know. Yeah, well, they may be stupid, they may be a fool, but you know, that's family. You might not even like it, members of your family, but people that we consider in our, this is a feature of tribalism, people that we consider in kind of our group, whatever our group is that we're ascribing to, we're a little bit more forgiving of them. But the other, they don't know what they're talking about. Especially when it comes to this perspectivism that I was talking about last time, when it comes to those meta-narratives or ideologies or big pictures. I'm right, and everyone else, not just wrong, but they're dead wrong. They have no idea what the hell they're talking about. But I do. Why? Because I'm self-taught. So let me tell you the ways you're wrong. All right. And Zhuangzi's not saying, okay, there might be a right way to do something. But also, there's a way to know kind of intelligence comes from not trying to always use the same methods in every instance. Okay, you've heard the expression before, like when you have a hammer, what do you always, what is everything? Everything's a nail. Okay, so if you're good at, like, all right, I've got a hammer. The notion here is when you have a hammer, everything you see is a nail. So every problem can be solved with this one tool that I have. If you have tools in the house, is the hammer the only thing that you need? I'm sure it's great, but you're going to need more for different tasks. Okay? Try and use a hammer in place of an Allen wrench. Because you bought some furniture that needs an Allen wrench. Try and use a hammer for that job. You could try. Back in my day, we used hammers. Okay? So there's that. Look at different tasks. And one place where Zhuangzi, let me see if I can find where he says this. No, not there. No, not that one. But let me summarize it, then we can move on. Yeah, let me summarize it this way. Like in Zhuangzi's time and before, there's kind of a looking back. Here's what, there were the good dynasties, the ones that were following the mandate of Changteng, the mandate of heaven, where they had it. A lot of societies have this, the ideal of like an epic, awesome, mythical past where everything was great. And then usually there's a collapse. There's some kind of fall. Well, it's great to look back and think, okay, where did they mess up? Let's stop the mix-up from ever happening. Today. So if it was, for the Chinese, it was, if the Zhou dynasty, their immorality caused so much corruption that China split into various kingdoms, let's go back to what they were doing before that and live by that virtue. For the Judahites in exile in Babylon, going back with Ezra back to Jerusalem, going, nobody knows anything about Hashem. Let's revisit this. Obviously, we screwed up somewhere, and we have all these prophets that told us, here's how we screwed up, so let's try and do this again, and this time let's focus a little bit on the law more, instead of building altars to Baal, or something like that. There's a sense in which something terrible happened, in response to that, now that we know that's what happened, we messed up, let's try and do things in a different way and not have the same mistake again. But if you do things exactly the same way, expect to fail. So there's a sense in which there's looking at what's the point here? What method do we need to use to solve the problem in front of us? And not every perspective, not every single perspective has viability in a particular situation. It's almost like Zhuangzi was looking at intersectional feminism 2,000 years ago. Not every single perspective can explain every phenomenon. You might have to see how things fit and explain things in a different way. Not every single obvious, naive narrative explains the phenomenon in front of us. The way that we perceive it with immediacy. In many ways, he's previewing Immanuel Kant. This is the most banal of rooms, but as I've said before, like the way we assume that even just physically, the way that we see the world, like with your eyeballs right now, looking around at this room, okay, that's red, that's dirty, all right, so much schmutz. Okay, we look around, we take things, and we assume that that's how they are. We assume it, we presume it. Kant says we do this through the transcendental unity of the apperception. Again, no quizzes in this class, it's not going to be a quiz. But so we assume that when we open our eyes, and this was an old theory of optics, that basically the light's just going right into our eyes, and the way things are out there, the way I'm touching it right now, the way things feel, this is cool and hard, that's how it is. As we know, cognitive scientists will tell you today, what's going on in the brain when I'm using my senses right? Is the world outside my body? Is this how it is? And the answer to that question is, we don't know. We don't know. Why do we say, why is this, what color is this door?
Red.
Not a trick question. Is this a postmodernist question? No, it's red. What does that mean? That photons are bouncing off it at a particular narrow set of wavelengths, right? Literally, it's bouncing off at a certain frequency, going into your eye holes. Your rods and cones are going, yes, stimulus. And then it's going down your optic nerve, into your brain, and your brain is interpreting that data coming in into a contigious experience that you go, that's a red door. That's just your eyes. There's echoes going off it right now. You can go up and touch it. Redness itself, no. All kinds of, you could do other things. You could smell it, you could lick it, don't do that. Okay? All your senses. But your senses are themselves only a subjective experience. You can't step outside your own experience and go, aha, there's the red door. It's only a red door because your eyeballs are looking at it. Now, I'm sure the light would be bouncing off it at the same frequency whether you're here or not. I'm not being Barclay on this. I'm not saying, I'm not going back to anything absurd like this. Like when we don't, everybody close your eyes, the red door doesn't exist. That's not what I'm saying. But it's redness as an experience. Redness as a phenomenon is something that's going on in our heads, not in the door.
That's individual perception.
Right. Okay.
If somebody who was colorblind came in and looked at the door.
Yeah, it would appear different, right?
Right, so that would be their reality versus someone else's reality.
And it's not, I hesitate to use the word reality there, but I know what you mean. Like, I'm going to go, their phenomenological experience. But you're right. That doesn't negate the fact that those wavelengths of light are bouncing off it at that particular frequency. And if for some reason it becomes blue, whoa, right, something different is happening with the photons, right? That's what's going on. But yeah, exactly. With someone who's colorblind, they're looking at the exact same phenomenon, but there's something in the apparatus that's affecting the experience, right? But here's the thing: the objectivity is a naive presumption that we place on the world. Like, that's how it is. Obviously, not obviously. The world we only perceive in a certain way because we're here to perceive it in the way that we do. But again, it's not like our eyes are not windows and we're just looking at things, oh, this is how they are. In fact, I mean, your eyes aren't doing the seeing. All your eyes are doing is taking in light. Your brain is doing the seeing. And we know this with pain. If you experience pain in your hand, ow, or yeah, I have arthritis, it's terrible in the morning, okay? It feels like I've been stung by bees in my hands, okay? But where's the pain? Is the pain happening in particular locations of my body? Where is the pain? Yeah. And not in your, it's not like there's, oh, there it is, there's the pain node. Okay, like there's this physical XY axis I can find where that's the pain part. Like in terms of a location. But that's where the experience is happening. It's not out there, it's going on in here. So Zhuangzi warns us, all right, you don't know as much as you think you do, and just settle down a bit. You also don't know what's going on in my mind, and you don't know what's going on in the minds of others. So again, with suspension of judgment, just stop making declarations all the time. Stop being so definitive. And not everything comes to us as easily as you think. We gotta close. So that's it for today. What I'm gonna do from here, excuse me, we are going to move on. So this is our third inquiry. I'm going to entertain any questions next time that people might have about this, but I'm also going to put up a poll on Blackboard. We've still got time, and this is a seminar.